Some say this piece of public performance was parody. I don't think it was. I think Jesus was very intentional about stepping into the imagery that caused people to understand that he was the coming king. He wanted them to know. He was not hiding away. He was not pretending. He was not looking for a way out. Despite his prayer, which tells us that he was very clearly aware of what was going on and what was coming, despite his prayer, on this day, in this reading, we hear the intentional stepping in of the Messiah into the death that was to be the exclamation mark to a life of service and love, of modeling, of freedom. There was a reason that Jesus came up to the festival. He didn't always go to the festival. Even in his time with his disciples, sometimes he said, no, I'm not going up, and showed up anyway. Sometimes he didn't go. Sometimes he just went and participated. But in this time, we see that things are prepared. A significant amount of the reading is spent describing the donkey procuring process. If you look on the second page of the reading, he sent two of his disciples, telling them, go into the city and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you there. Follow him. Is that spooky, or is it just planned in advance? I think John is telling us that Jesus knew what was going on and he was preparing them to see what was going on. The woman broke the jar of nard, expensive perfume, and poured it on his feet. Some were outraged, probably Judas, because he was the one who held the purse, and other gospels say he was more concerned with spending the money from the purse than keeping it. Some were outraged, saying that could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor. Jesus makes a statement that drives economists mad. You'll always have the poor with you. Do we have to? Does there have to always be poverty? It was the Prime Minister who said that, that unemployment is a necessary part of our society. I propose to you that Jesus' comment about the poor was more a statement of location than inevitability, that poverty is not necessary. But if there is poverty, that's where you'll find us, with the poor. He spent a long time through Lent telling us what it means to be a disciple, what it means to follow, what it means to step into his footprints. He's told us to take up our cross, a horrific image, and perhaps a little inappropriate since he didn't even carry his own cross, someone else carried it for him. Obviously, that's not what it's saying. And some disciples did, in fact, take up their own cross and followed him to death in that way. But the donkey, the nard, the dinner beforehand, these are all things that are pointing the disciples to see that Jesus stepped intentionally into this. This is not a God who set and forget, who created the world and then stood back to see how it unwound. This is not a God who gets involved in parking spots. This is a God who pays attention to the details and is intimately involved in the life of people. Not for trivial matters, but for life and death things. In another gospel, they called him the Prince of Peace. In this gospel, he steps right into the middle of Pax Romana. He walks in there knowing that to be named and labelled as a king would put a target on his back that would cause him to be in conflict with the rulers. Even then, he had to work hard at it because Pilate really, really didn't want to take him down. But Jesus had done the work, the background work, to make sure that those who were in power felt out of their depth, felt threatened, felt like this was all going to go badly if they didn't get rid of this troublemaker. So they did. They got rid of him. If only it were all so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of them and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of their own heart? Another writer says, I've been a victim of a selfish kind of love. It's time that I realize that there are some with no home, not a nickel to loan. Could it really be me? Pretending they are not alone. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. And no message could ever be clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself, then make a change. That was Michael Jackson, in case you didn't catch it. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn, just in case you think I don't read. Jesus walked into the Pax Romana, right into the gap between the palm and the cross. And he walked right up to the cross and he planted himself there with the crown on his head, clearly saying, this is the way. The Pax Romana, won by brutal decapitation and loss of life. The peace of Jesus, won by brutal crucifixion and loss of life. The peace of Jesus, the peace of Rome. We still live the peace of Rome. We live it by fighting wars overseas and acknowledging the brutality of it and the evil of it and tut-tutting and saying it's not okay. And today, many will march. I hope some of you will march for Palm Sunday, praying for peace, praying for the end of war. But we know that the price of the end of war is something more significant. The price of the end of war starts with a change of lifestyle. That those wars keep us in the custom that we're in the manner that we're accustomed to. Those wars are convenient for us because they're out there. We don't have to worry about them. The nature of them, I think, is revealed by the surprise that the Ukrainian people who lived lives just like us, surely that can't happen to us, and yet it did. Well, that's not fair. That's supposed to happen somewhere else. I'm not critiquing the Ukrainian people, I'm critiquing us. Those wars that benefit us are most beneficial when they're out of our way and they don't inconvenience us. So, the peace of Rome is still exacted today. The peace of Jesus lies within our hearts. And I suspect that part of Jesus' reason for stepping into this piece of public performance was so that we would recognize what's going on in our hearts. That we would recognize our desire for a saviour who would smite the lot of them, that we would recognize our desire for vengeance, that we would recognize our desire for violence to be done out there on our behalf, but not to us. That we would recognize the type of king we're looking for. And so it reveals the surprise that we hold that people like Donald Trump should get in power. Well, that's what happens. That's what happens when we look for that sort of king. We get presidents like Donald Trump, and we get people like the guy who was in England. Isn't it wonderful how quickly we forget their names? Because the peace of Jesus has a cost that is paid on a daily basis. It's a requirement to lay down our lives, to accept the possibility of crucifixion by whatever means that looks like. As we wave these palms over Jesus, it requires us to lay down our swords. When in the garden, one of Jesus' disciples cut off the ear of one of the temple guards, firstly, I'd suggest that if you're going to carry a sword, you should learn to use it better. That was a terrible shot. And secondly, I would suggest that Jesus saying, that's enough, lay down your weapons, was not just an order to them, but to all disciples. Tertullian said that disarming his disciple in the garden, Jesus disarmed all disciples. There's a reason why early Christians in the first 100 years couldn't stomach the idea of soldiers becoming Christians, coming to faith. John the Baptist saw it coming and told them what to do. But early Christians said, if you want to be a follower of Jesus, you've got to leave the army, because killing is not part of our job description. But it turned around quickly. 100 years after Gethsemane, only Christians could join the army. Christianity embraced the way of violence, put away the way of Jesus, retold the stories, justified it. And we keep doing it. Talk of just wars and justifying wars. Certainly just war has the possibility of putting a box around war and saying only this is okay. But Tertullian's line is that lifting up weapons against our enemy is not the way. Jesus called us to love our enemies. And so as we walk out of here today, I encourage you to ask, what is the price for you? What is the cost that Jesus is inviting you to pay to follow him? What are you letting go, laying down? What resentments are you putting aside? What old scars are you allowing to heal? As we walk with our palms held high, proclaiming the King, are you willing to walk in his reign, taking up your cross and following him?